Welcome back to the Imperfectionist Podcast. My name, as always, is David Rendall, and this is our special Speak Different series where we talk about how to do a better job giving presentations, whether you're an executive, whether you're an entrepreneur, or whether you're on stages regularly in some other capacity. But mostly we're trying to help people be better at it in daily life at work. And we've got a special guest tonight here, tomorrow there, all the way from Australia, Andrew Klein. I met Andrew at an event. I was speaking at the Recruitment and Consulting Services Association, I think is what it was called, RCSA, in Tasmania in Australia. If you don't know your Australian geography, and why should you? It's basically Florida in Australia. If you think about where Florida is in the US, Tasmania is a tiny little island off of the southeastern coast. And we were down there, and I was in the sessions before my keynote speech, and Andrew got on stage to start the day because he was the MC. He MCs events all over the country. And I remember the first words out of his mouth basically is he said, "Okay, quick announcement before we get started. We are here in Tasmania and there has been a time change. So make sure you set your clocks back 1 hour and 10 years. And I remember that one caught me off guard and was very good. He had me I was like, oh man, that is important. You know, I've already changed 16 hours. I got to make sure I'm on the right time. And then he basically was making fun of the Tasmanians for being backwards and behind the times, which I didn't know anything about. Which is another funny thing, actually. I've been to Australia quite a few times and spoken all over the country. And I remember the first time I went, I wanted to be it's easy if you travel. It's not really my style, but what some people do is they complain about how this new place isn't like what they're used to. And the people are bad in some way or aren't as good as the people they're used to. And so I always travel being very open to understanding and accepting the people I'm with. And I remember the dinner we had that night, basically all of the Australians at the table were spending all of their time making fun of Australians. And that's when I learned a term called bogan, which is like the American word for redneck, where Australian people make fun of people for being too Australian. And so I'm like, oh, I'm learning from Australians that Australians are the worst. And that apparently in Tasmania, it's even a different level, right? It's a different level. So that was meeting Andrew. And then we've worked at multiple events together over time. We've become friends. I visited him when I was there for other things. And when I was putting together this podcast, I thought, you know what? I need to have Andrew on. And so welcome, Andrew. Tell us a little bit about how you got started in speaking and how you got started as an MC and how you sort of developed the skills that you have to do it well.
Will do. So first of all, thank you for having me on, and good morning from Australia. I know it's
9 a.m.
evening.
We're recording this 9 a.m. in Australia, and that it's the night before 7 p.m. in North Carolina.
I'm looking out at a bright day in Sydney. I am delighted that you remember that line about Tasmania, because that was a long time ago, and I work very much on the basis that not only do people not remember what I said within 5 minutes of me saying it, by the next day they've forgotten. And for you to remember 10 years later, like, well done you. You've made my day just by the fact that I said something that you remembered making fun of Tasmanians. By the way, I promise you we were making fun of Americans too, maybe not in front of you. We make fun of each other, but we make fun of you guys probably as much, if not more. So it was not
that was one of them. Somebody said, thank you. You did a good job. You're not like most Americans. We call them seagull speakers. And I said, what does that mean? And they said, you fly over, you shit on us, and then you fly back. Yeah. And I was like, well, thank you for not putting me into that category. So I know there's definitely, some American bashing that goes on.
Just a little.
I think at that one, there were 2 American sort of keynote speakers. So maybe you all dialed it back to try to make us feel at home.
Quite possibly. And the RCSA, which you referred to as the Recruitment Consulting Services Association, has had a major change. I still work with them. They're still one of my clients. They are still called the RCSA, but they are now no longer the Recruitment Consulting Services Association. They have, no doubt, after a lot of discussion around the board table, they're now the Recruitment, Consulting and Staffing Association. Just so that you know, big change, big
Big
change.
change.
They still do exactly the same thing.
I'll update my
So
records.
your question, how did I get into this game? It's an often asked question. I was a lawyer. I started off, I was at school. I was the guy at school who loved, I'm not an extrovert, but loved public speaking, loved debating, did a lot of public speaking, did a lot of debating, was good at English and history. The logical thing at my school was, well, then you go into law.
Yeah.
I wanted to be a lawyer. Trained to be a lawyer within about 6 months of studying law. I looked around the class and thought, I'm not like these people. They are all really into this. I am not into this at all. But I was an optimist. I still am. I'm an optimist, and I thought it'll get better. So I stuck around, and it never got better. I got to the end of my degree, delayed it for as long as possible, traveled. Eventually, I got to the end and thought, well, I don't know what else to do. I'm qualified. I'll get a job. It'll get better. Got a job. First year, hated it. I thought, well, that's just because I'm a junior lawyer. It'll get better. And you know where this story's heading. It didn't get better after a few years.
I'm detecting a pattern.
I
Yeah.
was right. And left. Literally walked away and left. And I was happy from the moment that I left, even when 2 days, 3 days, I left on a Friday. The following Monday, I was at Town Hall Station, which is like Main Street, Central Station, New York. And I had a job. I got a job before I left the law to make sure that I could get some money. I had a job handing out pamphlets, handing out leaflets to people as they got off the train, advertising a friend's business. She had started off a cake delivery business, and she wanted somebody to dress up as the Swedish chef from the Muppet Show and hand out leaflets for her cake delivery business. And
Yeah.
I was doing that for like $4 an hour after having been a corporate lawyer in a suit working in a big city law firm. And I was super happy. I remember there was a junior lawyer who subsequently became a partner at the firm that I was at, who took my leaflet from me, got off at the station, took my leaflet, looked at me and he went, "Good career move, Kleiny." And it was somewhat a little slap in the face. I
Yeah.
couldn't have been happier.
Yeah.
So that's how I left the law. That doesn't explain how I ended up here, but using the actual skills that I had, which was public speaking, and I had done at uni, I'd done a lot of theatre and impro in particular, a lot of impro. Using all of that, I ended up, long story, but I ultimately ended up in the conference industry doing team building activities. So fun team building things. And then with a business partner. And while we were doing that, we started to see that there was a whole circuit of people that we didn't know about, that you know about, that I didn't know about, of people who were making a living speaking at
Yeah.
conferences, including MCing and facilitating and moderating. And I thought, that is something that uses my skills. If I can monetize, if that's monetizable, if that's such a word,
Yeah.
that's what I want to do. And so with no real knowledge that that would be a career, that led to me ultimately doing various things in the conference industry, but honing down and narrowing my offering to the only thing that I do now 30 years later for the last 23, 4 years, working as a professional MC, emceeing conferences in all different industries, largely in Australia, New Zealand, a little bit in Asia, occasionally in your part of the world. I'm in America every once in a while, running conferences and sitting in conference rooms all day, observing presenters.
So that takes us to our next thing. You're like me, you're not just on stage, you get to see a lot of people on stage. And so I was telling you before we started that, some of the stories in the book are, here's a bad speech I saw, learn these lessons. Here's a good speech I saw, learn these lessons. Let's start with the good ones. And you studied this too, and obviously you're on stage. So what are some of the characteristics of good speeches that what's sort of your philosophy of what makes a good speech, that someone who's listening can say, okay, I need to do more of that next time? And maybe what are some stories and examples that you've seen of people doing it well on stage? Because I'll ask you first, do you If you put percentages on it, are the majority of people you see on stage doing good speeches, or are the
No,
majority doing? Yeah.
no, no, no.
So it's in the
The only
minority, right? So let's talk about what makes those select few good speeches good. What are the lessons we can take away from?
I would say 30% are bad, like really cringy bad. And I'm sitting there feeling that in the room. And in my head, I'm thinking, what am I possibly going to say when I get up after this person?
Yeah,
What am I going to say to
yeah,
not say what the audience and I are all thinking, which was,
yeah,
thanks for wasting the last hour of our life. How am I
yeah,
going to somehow make that not so car crashy? So that's
yeah.
30%. I would say the vast majority are average. And there's a very small percentage, Dave. I'm going to say less than 10% at a conference. This is at a 2 or 3 day conference where there might be,
That's a tough number. Yeah,
yeah, there might be 25 presenters over a 3 day conference, maybe more.
yeah.
A very small percentage are great. What makes the great ones great? What I'm about to say is actually a little bit counterintuitive because it isn't something that in and of itself is going to be a helpful comment, I don't think, to your listeners. And that is the ones that are great are not following a particular formula and they are not doing the same thing as each other
Mm,
often. Okay. So I do enough conferences to see that there are lots of people who have been trained in presentation skills. Somebody has assisted them putting their
yeah, yeah.
presentation together. But that person has given them, I would guess, has given them a formula, a thing to do. I'm not against the idea of formulas, but it's such a strict formula that it doesn't
Mm,
allow for what this individual's strengths are. It's almost
yeah,
saying, do this, 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 and this, and there's like 19 different things, and there's a speaker matrix. And if you follow those 17 things, there are some basics. We'll get to that I do agree everyone should do. But my answer to what makes a great presenter great is not that they are perfect. And I'm not just saying it because I can see your giant imperfectionist sign. I know it's your thing, but it's the ones who break the rules. It's the ones who are rough around the edges. It's the ones who are not perfect, but what they have in common is that they're authentic, meaning that
mm,
they play to their strengths and their strengths are going to be different. Some people's strengths are that they are very quiet and very low key and very deliberate,
mm,
formulaic, and that's their strength. And often those people are introverts. And some of the best presenters I see, ironically, counterintuitively, are not the performers, the theatrical people, the super confident people. They're
yeah,
actually emotionally intelligent. And the flip side is that sometimes I see people who are very confident, but they're confidently bad, as in they think that they're nailing it. That they're very confident of what they're saying, but they say it in a way that is not authentic, or they're very fluent or perfect, or their language, that every single word is perfect. You
yeah,
actually delved into the second question, which is what makes people bad. I should stick on the what makes people good. It's the ones who are real. And the ones who are real may break the rules of what a good
yeah,
presenter does, and they might sit down on the edge of the stage, or they might stand behind the lectern, which some presentation skills trainers would say, don't ever do that. No, if that makes you feel
yeah,
comfortable, if that's your
yeah.
comfy place, go there. So the best ones are the authentic ones. I think, generally speaking, the best ones are the ones who have really thought through what they're doing, but not over rehearsed it,
Mm,
right? Intuitively, people tell you rehearse, 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 rehearse. Yeah, to a small extent. Just know your stuff. But once you're out on the stage, I want to feel like I feel in really good theatre. Really good
yeah,
theatre for me is when I'm seeing somebody talking and I'm not thinking they're going through their lines and they did this yesterday and they're going to do it tomorrow, like professional speakers do it over and over again.
right,
I
right,
feel
right,
like this is a conversation that's happening for the first time. They're
right.
saying this as they're thinking of it. So it's the
Yeah,
authenticity, I reckon, is my not so short answer to your question as to what
yeah,
makes the good speaker.
yeah. What are some what are the ways that you sense that? What are the ways that you sort of see that? What are they doing that gives you that sense of authenticity?
it's probably not that dissimilar to the comedian who gets up in a comedy store and runs through their 20-minute spot, and it's perfect and it's good. But to distinguish that from the comedian who runs through their 20-minute spot, but you can tell that they are changing what they're saying depending on they're reading the room and they're asking questions of the audience, doing the crowd work, and they're bouncing off the audience. And as they bounce off the audience, that they are getting an answer that is making them say something for the very, very first time, because
Yeah,
there's no
yeah,
way they knew what that person. A good
yeah.
speaker, in my opinion, will often be the speaker. I know this is your thing as well. A good speaker will be the one who they've got the 10 things or the 5 things, they've got their key messages and their key stories, but they are stopping and turning their speech, their presentation into a conversation, a genuine
Mm,
conversation,
yeah.
albeit one that they're leading and that they're guiding, but they will ask the audience questions and then respond to that question. So they've turned it into a conversation with a template in their mind, but quite clearly they're being authentic because they're responding to the audience, they're including the audience, they're getting the audience involved. They're using humor. Sometimes that is pre-written jokes, but sometimes they're responding to something that happened in the room, or something that they are seeing on the ceiling, or something that happens when their microphone pops, or when the glass of water falls on stage, or when somebody calls out something. So it's the only time that this particular presentation has ever happened like that. You
Mm,
can tell that they are in the moment. They're still presenting their content, but essentially, I always say there should be no difference from the audience's perspective to I'm having a cup of coffee with David Rendall. We're just having a conversation, right? You're guiding it,
yeah,
and I'm giving
yeah.
my input. I'm going to give you my key messages. But the audience should feel that it's just you and me chatting. The audience should feel that it's just Andrew chatting with that one person in the audience. There might be 1,000 of them, but I want each of them to feel like I'm having a conversation with them, still giving them my stories, my key messages, but I want them to feel that this is spontaneous and the first time we're having this conversation.
Yeah. One of the examples we give in the book is I did a presentation in Bahrain about presentation skills, or I was supposed to. And then I was supposed to, these people had been through this training program on presentation skills. And then I was supposed to be one of the judges kind of giving them feedback. And it was an all female training class. And I got there, and I don't know if you've ever felt anxiety in a room, like in the air. I don't know if you've ever felt like fear. I don't know. I don't remember how I sensed it, but I had all this stuff planned, and I had traveled to this other country, and I had things designed to be, you know, effective in a different culture with a different religion and a different mindset. And I just put down the laptop and I asked a question. I said, I said, how are you feeling out there? We're going to throw up and I'm going to have a heart attack and she's having a panic attack and we all want to run out of the room and we don't want to do this and we're terrified and miserable. And I said, okay. I said, how am I feeling? And they go, you feel fine. And I said, why do I feel fine? You do this all the time. And I said, I'm not from here, but where I live, ladies talk a lot. And so are you telling me you don't have experience talking? And they go, it's not the same. This is different. It's public speaking. And I said, that's the problem, right? If public speaking is a dramatically different activity, then you have no experience doing it, given your current situation. If public speaking is a lot like a conversation and some of the same things that you do to have an effective conversation are good to do in a presentation, then you've got almost a lifetime since you started talking of experience in how to do this. And then I sort of started explaining to them how that's true. The number one being stories, right? If I ask you, Andrew, how was your weekend? You don't say, give me 30 minutes. I'm going to put together a PowerPoint deck with some bullet point slides and I'll come back and I'll talk to you about my weekend. You probably have a headline of some kind. It was a terrible weekend. I took the wife and the kids, right? Headline, one idea. It was awful. And then you tell me a series of short stories about how awful it was. The hotel lost our reservation. We had to go somewhere else. It was raining. We couldn't go out to the beach. One of the kids got sick. We had to go to urgent care. On and everything reinforces the idea that it was a terrible weekend. And you didn't need notes. You didn't need bullet points. And you didn't really even need any preparation because you were talking about something you understood and you were doing it in a somewhat coherent way. So even when you say it feels like a conversation, I think it sort of reinforces what we talk about in the book. Good public speaking is a little bit more normal. And that's funny because I spend my whole life telling people to be weird. And the whole book's called Speak Different. But again, most people don't speak normal on stage. So talking normal on stage is the weirdest thing you can do, right?
There is
Talking
this
like a regular
conversation.
person,
Agree.
talking the way, communicating the way people normally would, not putting on some kind of rehearsed programmatic kind of show.
Which is what most
So it's
people do.
interesting that you said that. Yeah.
Well, but what you just said really resonates, that I've picked up over the years. I'm sure it's the same in the States. There are people who are very well rehearsed and very bright. It's got nothing to do with their intelligence, their knowledge. They're often the gurus of the topic. But they walk on stage and instantly they start talking, and they're talking in a presentation voice. It's not their conversational. You can pick it instantly. It's almost
Yeah.
like there's often this moment, certain speakers who have been trained in Australia will do this thing that they'll get this introduction. I'll be the introduction person. I'm emceeing them. So I've given them this, hopefully, warm welcome with a bit of humor and a bit of insight into who they are, and a great opportunity, often with some funny little anecdotes about them that they've told me. They walk on stage and I'm thinking, I've just given you a line, grab that line and start with that. But they don't
Yeah.
do that. They walk on stage, they walk out to the middle of the stage, they stand still, and they pause for about 3 seconds. Why? Because some trainers in Australia taught people
Right. There's
20 years ago, yeah, do
start
that. And
over.
like
Yeah.
that's a TED Talk, okay? This is not a TED Talk. We know the TED Talks are pre-rehearsed. Walk on stage, refer to something that I just said, ask the audience how they are. Don't say, I'm so delighted to be here. Thank you to the organizers for inviting me, because everyone says that. Don't say that. Just start talking. Ask them a question. They don't do that. They come on stage and it's very stilted and theatrical. It's perfect, but it's not real. I talking about stories, I have a story to tell you that I haven't thought about for a while, but I used to tell this quite a lot when I would be talking to people about presenting. I mentioned that I was a lawyer. When I was studying law, without even realizing that I was interested in presentation skills and presenting, I had this observation that I only realized later what I had picked up. And that was this, that in my second year of law, there were two subjects that I was doing, two law subjects that I was doing side by side. One of them was criminal law. One of them was wills, probate, and trusts law. I don't know what you call it in the States, but
Enthralling
probate.
stuff. Same. Yeah. Same. We call
No.
it probate and all that. Yeah.
So the lecturer that I had for criminal law wrote the textbook. He should have been like, he was the expert. He was the professor. He was the genius. He was the guy. He wrote the textbook. Nobody at my uni knew criminal law better than this dude. He was the worst lecturer I've ever had in my life. He made criminal law, which, to be honest, that's the reason that all young law students did law,
Yeah.
right? We all
Yeah.
were going to be criminal lawyers like the ones on TV.
Yeah.
He
Yeah.
made that really sexy, exciting, dynamic subject. He made it excruciatingly boring. Like, it was a horrible, we had to do it for a year. At
Yeah.
the same time as doing criminal law, I was doing trust law. And there was a lecturer by the name of Brian, who was one of those old guys. He was a crusty old academic. He'd been doing it for years, but he had learnt over the years that 18, 19, 20-year-olds have no experience of trusts, or hopefully they've had no experience of wills or probate. They don't know what it is, and they're not interested in this very dull, grey, conservative, antiquated sounding subject. And clearly he had the sense over time to go, okay, I've got to dress this up. I've got to make this sexy and exciting, because it's not. The content is not sexy and exciting. And he would do this thing from the very, very, very first class that we were in. He would get people, and none of us had done the reading, none of us had done the preparation, and he'd been in the game for long enough to know that we hadn't prepared, and he was okay with that because he knew that we wouldn't. But he would get you involved in such a way that you really had to sit up and notice, because you knew that Brian was going to ask you questions and get you involved. So he would take people and bring them out the front of the class and go, okay, you're the dead guy. I want you to lie here on the table. And he would get somebody to lie on the table. He'll go, okay, you're the grandson, you're the son, you're the daughter-in-law, you're the new girlfriend, and I want you all to come out here, and he'll put you all in your positions and go, okay, grandfather has died. And he would start, we would not have to do the talking. He would do the talking, but he would occasionally get us to, say something or do something. I think you know where I'm heading with this. We loved trusts. And we did our reading for trusts, and we learned trusts. I still remember some things from trusts from Brian. And to me, when I look back on it, that was a crime. I know we're talking about criminal law. That was a crime that the most interesting subject was made the most boring, and the most boring subject was made the most interesting. And I see that to this day. David, I'm not kidding you. I was at an agriculture conference a couple of years ago, and I sat through a 1-hour presentation from a guy talking about soil, SOIL. Now, I had no interest in soil when I walked in that room, but that hour was like, he loved soil and he was passionate about soil, and he knew that was a weird thing to be enthused about. And he was so enthusiastic, and he told such good stories. That's my answer to the difference between a good presenter and a bad presenter. Realize that your audience are not as interested in your content as you. Make it interesting. Look at it from the perspective of the audience, as in put yourself into the audience's shoes, and let's acknowledge that this presentation system that we have is dull and broken and boring, and we've taken you to a conference and we've fed you and given you drink until 3:00 in the morning, and then at 8:00 the next morning we're going to be showing you dull PowerPoint slides. Let's acknowledge that and make it fun, make it interactive, make it interesting. And the good presenters do that, but there's so few of them.
Yeah, I love it.
Sorry, that's a long answer.
We've got you riled up. You got me thinking about a bunch of stuff. First of all, you said nobody cares about it as much as you do. And I always said, and it turned out not to be true, partially because I had a co-author and so I wasn't allowed. But I always said if I wrote a book about this, I was going to call it Nobody Cares. Because I think the good presenters walk in. I always say I dramatically underestimate people's interest and attention. I'm going to basically walk in and say, nobody cares. It's my job to get them to care. I think the bad presenters walk in and go, people love this. And whatever I say, they've got nothing better to do. And my answer to that is they have every single thing in the world right in their hand. Every problem, every entertainment, if they're into gambling, it's in their hand. If they're into music, it's in their hand. If they're into sports, it's in their hand. If it's their family, it's in their hand. Every single thing is right here. It's my job to get them to care. But the other thing you said that caught my attention, lately I've been doing a lot of MCing for these business owners who own IT businesses, and their classic thing is IT isn't sexy. When I talk about how to make presentations interesting, they say, well, you got to understand our topic isn't sexy. And I lost it at a recent event, and I did a rant a little bit like you did, and I said, every single movie thriller in the last 20 years has a hacker, the internet, a thumb drive that someone needs to get their hands on, a thumb drive that someone lost, a crypto key that's going to unlock a database that if you get the combination for the codes for the missiles that are going to do an AI that's going to take over. I mean, you have I'm telling them, not only are you wrong, you have the sexiest thing on earth, but I think that's a mindset. I mean, I taught one day of statistics when I was in college. I wasn't at the kind of college where teachers' assistants teach, but the guy was going to be gone for one day and he said, can you cover it? And I'd studied some math and it was the psychology version of statistics. And I said, I got this. And he gave me a chance. and it was the greatest day of my life. But that's what I did. I was like, statistics could be really interesting. And most people say statistic is a dry, boring, mathematic, whatever. Open up the internet on any given day, the news on any given day. What is it? The recent study shows they're arguing that this is going up by this percent. This is going down by this percent. The majority of these people believe this. A minority of people believe that this is happening. Statistics are everywhere. And to your point, if you do like that other professor and you just walk in and you say, let's open up Google News today and let's just look at the first statistic that comes up and talk about how they probably got there. They say 90% of Australians believe. Well, did they talk to 90%? Did they talk to 27 million people last night? Is that what happened? Oh, well, no. Well, that's called sampling. Okay. But now we're talking about it in a way that, makes sense or is somewhat interesting to people. So I think that's a big one where people let themselves off the hook. I don't have a sexy topic. And sometimes I would give into that. I go, oh yeah, you have to talk about finance or you have to talk about this. But then I remember even when I wasn't talking about things that were, naturally interesting, I think to your point, people have things that are obviously interesting and they make them terrible. And other people have things that are obviously uninteresting and they make them interesting. So it isn't the subject. And so that's not a kind of a get out of jail free.
There is, and I don't say this facetiously, but there is a pretty low bar when people walk into a presentation, right? Their expectations are low. They are not expecting to go and see the Odyssey on IMAX, right? If I go and see the Odyssey on IMAX, I'm expecting blown away. When I'm walking into any presentation, but the risk and compliance presentation or the procurement presentation, my bar is down here. So I say to presenters, you don't have to be unbelievably, incredibly brilliant and fascinating and engaging, but you can be less boring, right? You can be less boring. So it's sort of a cop out. And you're right with IT. I see it with IT. I see it with chief financial officers. I see it in insurance. I see it with the in-house legal team when they're presenting, that they go, how can I make this can't be interesting? And I go, well, it can be, but at the very least, let's just start with it can be a little bit less boring. And if most people put up, which they do, I'm sure it's the same in the conferences that you go to, if most people put up really, really boring text heavy dot points, bullet points, PowerPoint, then at the very least, why don't you not do that? If most people, to your point about stats, if most people put their stats up on stage, on the screen with the details, like
the whole graph, every color, every line.
Why don't you not do that? Why don't you just have the giant number 75% and don't even tell them what it is? Until it goes up 75%, and then you tell them the stat. You don't need to have the stat up there. That's boring to read the whole stat. It's such a cliche, but the less is more argument is so valid when it comes to presentations. People try and do too much. Their PowerPoint, which is we've been talking about this for years, David. Like for years, people have been going, we've stuffed up the PowerPoint. Do you remember when PowerPoint first came in? It was like my mind was blown because I'd grown up at uni with overhead projectors and blackboards. It was unbelievable. And there are now lots of really good technology and lots of good platform. People are still using old style PowerPoint with old style templates, slightly sexier font and a little bit of color. And there's so much more that we can do. But really, the best presenters, they don't have that much information. They realize no one's going to remember 750 things. If you walk out of a presentation having remembered 2 or 3 things, you've done as a presenter, you've done a much better job than the person who went through 150 things.
Yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned going to law school, because one of the stories, one of the quotes we use is from a book called Made to Stick by the Heath brothers, Why Some Ideas Survive and Others Die. And again, I've read hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of books. I think my Audible.com app today says I have 600 titles in there, and I only add them as I listen to them, basically. So I've at least listened to that many, plus I've read, hundreds of other books. But I keep coming back to it. And one of the stories I always remembered from there is they talked to a criminal defense attorney. And one of the things you do in that situation is called the closing arguments, where it's the last thing you get to say to the jury before they go in there. And he said the mistake a lot of people make is they say, if I tell them 10 things, they'll probably at least remember one thing. And he said, and the problem with that is when you tell them 10 things, they will remember 0 things. Because by the time you've told them the second thing, they've forgotten the first thing, and they're kind of thinking about the second thing. But before you get far enough into it, you jump to the third thing, and then they get distracted by that, and then they don't even pay attention. We think we call it, sometimes in America, I don't know if you have this term, they call it the shotgun approach. And we tell them is you think, well, I've got to hit something. And it's like, no, you hit nothing. You hit nothing doing that. And so that's why I told you before we came on the air, our thing is persuasive presenters tell powerful stories that reinforce a single idea. And the idea is if you reinforce the single idea for the whole time, even if people disagree, even if they're not going to do it, even if people don't like it, nobody walks away going, I don't know what Andrew was talking about. He used to talk, I don't know what he wanted me to know. You at least leave going, Andrew's sure passionate about that thing that he just kept saying over and over and over again and kept explaining and kept reinforcing.
Stories, though, that they will, to your point, if they remember one of those, if all of those stories are in service of your one, essentially your one main point, they won't remember the point. They'll remember the story. And if the story is well told and somebody says, what was the purpose of them telling the story? They will know.
They can back themselves into it. Wait a second. He told that story about, and then the main thing was, right, the moral of the story was,
There are people in Australia who, I'm sure it's the same over there. There's a lot of people in Australia now who run speaker training for professional speakers, not just presentation skills training, but training for professional speakers. And one of the things that I've heard, one of those people, some of them are great, some of them are terrible, but one of the good ones once said, every speaker in Australia should aim to be known as the something guy or the something girl. So if Dave Rendall is the goldfish guy or the pink guy, and that is in service of everything of the stories that you're telling, or if you're the guitar person because you're the person that played the guitar, or if you're the, whatever it is, the water person because you did some joke about water or told some story, whatever it is. I'm not sure that most presenters would be able to go, my one key message is that. They would go, well, I have to tell them about all of these many
things to say.
And they're the nothing guy or the nothing girl.
Yeah.
Partly because when you give a presentation, certainly at a conference, you're not the only presenter. In that day, there's 7 other people before you.
It's an avalanche.
Who are after you. So why are they remembering you? And I'm competitive. I want to be the one that they go, I don't remember that much about the day, but I remember that guy. I remember Andrew. I remember he was talking about X, Y, or Z. Why did I stand out? Why did you stand out? Like, it's not your pink glasses. That doesn't hurt. It's the story that you told, and the pink glasses and the goldfish. They're all in service of that message. I don't think people think about their presentations in that way at all. They start with their PowerPoint. And on they go. 1 slide, 2 slides, 3 slides, got to the end, tick the box. The compliance people are happy. Everyone's happy. I've done what I have to do. And everyone tells them that they were great because nobody says that was a shit presentation. Everyone says good job. So the people who give ordinary presentations never get any better. The more senior they are, the less likely someone is going to say to them, Michelle, you're really, really good CEO. You're terrific. But you're not a great presenter, and maybe you don't need to present at the conference at all. And enlightened CEOs will go, you know what, you're right. I don't need to present at the conference. I'll be the CEO sitting in the audience, networking. I'll ask some questions of my presenters. I'll get my rock star junior executive team people to present the messages. Why do I have to present? I don't need to. Why am I presenting? Because I've done it every year beforehand, because every conference has to start with me presenting for 20 minutes. The enlightened ones get that. Unless they're great presenters, then they should.
Yeah, now you've made me mad because you gave an example that I wish I would have put in the book. Not only, and I've thought of it before, I didn't think of it when I was writing it. Not only do your extra points get knocked out by your previous points because people can't remember everything, you're right. You're in a lineup And even if it's an employee meeting, you're doing the 2:00 employee meeting, but they were in a 1:00 meeting about something. They're going to be in a 3:00 meeting about something. At the conference, you're the opening keynote speaker, but then there's a midday speaker, there's an afternoon speaker, there's breakout speakers, there's vendors that get on stage, there's the MC sharing things. There's this avalanche of sort of information coming at people, and if you think they can handle 4 things from you and 5 things from the next person, 7 things from the next person, you're really, again, overestimating what people can really handle. And that's sort of our point. I did a talk at Microsoft where they asked me to focus the whole thing on the one idea part. They're like, just do 90 minutes on why it's important to have one idea. And the simple idea I came up with is people have limited time, energy, and attention. Right. And in a world where people have limited time, energy, and attention, you can't overtax their time, energy, and attention. And so your best bet is to pick one thing. And you were excited earlier because I remembered a bit you did in Tasmania. I mean, geez, 13 years ago, 15 years ago. I mean, I don't even know. And that's sort of the goal. If you can get past the 5-minute barrier to the people remember it 5 hours later, people remember it the next day. But if people can bump into you years later and say, I remember you, you're the person who, and that's the goal. And it doesn't happen, it doesn't happen with 10 things.
Can I just jump
Go
in
ahead.
there and just
Yeah.
give you a quick example that again, I'm talking specifically now about conference presentations because they're the main ones that I see. I don't see that many that are done in a boardroom in someone's office, which a lot of presentations are not done at conferences, but with the conferences one, not only do we put them on a lineup with 10 other speakers, we put them in a room. We usually put them in a dark room, convention center, hotel, right? Not with
Yep.
natural light. We
Yep.
put them in a room after we fed them a lot for lunch. So they're a little
Yeah.
bit carb heavy and a little bit tired.
Yeah.
We plied them with alcohol the previous night. We are not really allowing them to publicly look at their phones, even though we know that
Yeah.
just below the table they're all looking at their
Yeah.
phones. So we're
Yeah.
taking them away from the sexier thing that they would prefer to do than listen to you. And they will do it if you're boring, right? You
Yeah.
know those lights
Yeah.
are shining on people's faces because they're looking at the phone during the boring speaker. But when the good presenter is presenting, there's no lights on the faces, everyone's in. So we do all of that. So the condition, and we do that over 3 days, and a lot of people have flown in, so they're tired. So we don't give them optimal conditions, number one. And number two, I look at it very much like a music festival. Okay. A
Mm,
conference lineup is it's like Coachella. Okay. It's like Glastonbury. That there are lots and lots and lots and lots and lots of people who are getting up on stage at Glastonbury or Coachella or
yeah.
whatever,
Yeah.
and you're not going to remember all of them. You're not necessarily going to remember the final one, although usually the best, Beyonce will go last of the day. We'll
Right.
have
Right.
Jay-Z and Beyonce last. But before Beyonce and Jay-Z, there was another 15 people that we've heard. We put together a poster, just like a conference, with all of the people that was. You go to Coachella and you see a lot of really good presentations, a lot of really good acts. You're not going to remember them all. Somebody's going to say, what was Coachella like? And you'll name 3. It won't necessarily be the last 3. It might be somebody who was on the B stage at 3:00 in the afternoon when it was still bright, but they engaged with the crowd and their set was fantastic. And people leaned in and leant forward and got off their phones and got into it. What did that band do differently to the other one? Who maybe just, they just went through the motions because they've been performing for 17 years. And, I don't know if you've ever seen Bruce Springsteen, but I got to tell you, every single time that guy gets up on stage, it's the first time. It's the first time. I don't know how he does it, but
Well,
he's in the
that's
moment
part of
and he's
that. Yeah,
improvising and
that's
he's
part of
changing
that
his set.
curse of knowledge. Yeah, that's part of that curse of knowledge. I mean, I think people do maybe get bored with hearing themselves say it again, and they can't remember that it isn't boring for
First
the
time.
audience because it's their
First
first time, right? And so if your show is here we go again playing this stupid song, and maybe you almost feel like, and they probably feel that way too. Well, then why would they have paid to leave their house? So I think you know, it reminds me of a lot of the ways you can customize, and it's basically everything you do. You don't have canned jokes. You had the thing about Tasmania. You're doing things based on, like you said, what the last speaker said. I've
Keeps
tried
me
to bring a
engaged.
go ahead.
Yeah. That
Oh,
keeps me engaged.
yeah.
Yeah, that allows me to be in the moment.
Yeah. So I've tried to integrate that. And the more I MC, the more I just make it part of my keynote, where the first 5 minutes, it's sort of what you said, almost every time is it's clear to them at the end of that 5 minutes that I know I'm here. I know a little bit about them. I understand the setting. And that's like the lead into my talk. I don't just walk up and go, here's my canned thing that I do all the time. And rock stars do it. They're in Seattle and they wear the Seattle Seahawks jersey. They're in New York and they wear a football jersey or a New York Yankees shirt. They do something to sort of they reference something that's happened recently in that place. They let you know that they know. I remember the one I did that went over really good in Australia, and I didn't know I'd be back. I think I was back every year for like 15 years. And sometimes I was there for 3 weeks at the time. So I didn't know I'd get so much mileage out of this. But I created the Australian to American translation guide. And it's, hey, when it's nighttime here, it's daytime in America, and we drive on the right hand side of the road, and you drive on the left hand side of the road. And some of it's pretty basic. But your liberals are our conservatives, and your conservatives are our liberals in politics, and it just keeps going. And I said, but that's not the hardest part. The hardest part is when you have a word and we have the same word, but for something different, right? We have cookies, you call them biscuits, but we have biscuits, you call them scones. We have lemonade, you have lemonade, but your lemonade is our lemon lime soda, like a 7-Up or a Sprite. And, we go through these things and people start laughing and they start acknowledging. And if you want to push the boundaries a little bit, you can mention a fanny or a fanny pack or something.
Or a song.
And yeah, or thongs. Yeah, great. Budgie smugglers. And so that let people know I know where I am. I've taken the time to learn about you. I'm not just, to your point, delivering a performance. And I would always spend time. And I've just started doing that more and more. In fact, I almost can't stop myself now that I'm an MC. I remember I was doing a presentation in Arizona and they were talking a lot about AI or something. There was like a long AI panel before me. And I don't know what made me think about it, but I just started taking notes like I was the MC. And I said, I know I'm here for this, but you just talked about Lat, and I used to be a college professor, and I'm an MC. And here's a few things that I want to say about what they just said. And then I'll kind of lead into my thing. And I think that was, people like that. We're here right now. Let's do something that only works right here, right now. And let me respond to the situation a little bit.
Yeah.
And
The
I
audience
think
love
more
it.
people could do that. That's a good idea.
The audience love it when you do that. Not enough speakers do that. Generally speaking, no pun intended, generally speaking, what I see most speakers do is they arrive, professional speakers anyway, they will arrive for their presentation. They'll get there a little bit before, do their audio visual check, get the microphone set up, walk in, do their thing, say thanks very much, and head off. The great speakers, to what you just said, and it makes an enormous difference for several reasons. They will arrive many hours beforehand. They will sit up there for many hours up the back, very anonymously. No one knows who they are. You're a nothing at that stage. They will take notes. They'll take mental notes. And if they're in the moment, to get back to the point that we were talking about at the very beginning, if they're really in the moment and being authentic, they will just slip in. As Alison said actually in her presentation this morning, and it really resonated with me, blah, 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 blah. Or I've noticed that every speaker that I've heard
Yeah.
so far today has actually had a common message. And the audience is sitting there going, A, I didn't even know you were in the room. That's cool. Most people don't do that. B, now your presentation is not some just standalone set that you take off with. You've put it in the context of the theme of the conference and all the things that
Yeah.
have happened today. And from your perspective as a speaker, it forces you to be in the moment because you are saying things that you didn't say in the previous
You didn't
presentation
plan to say,
because
yeah.
you're there. Some comedians, I've heard, and I listen to a lot of podcasts from comedians about the art of comedy. I'm not a comedian, but I'm really interested in what they do. There are some comedians who have a set, but they will deliberately take their set every time and keep exactly the same stories, exactly the same jokes, but they will just rearrange the segments because it forces them to be in the moment and to think a little bit differently about how they connecting that bit with that bit. And
Yeah.
presenters can do that too. There is no
Yeah.
reason why you can't go, well, here's my central my central way of doing things. But today, I'm actually going to, if I'm using PowerPoint, I'm going to change it up a little bit. I'm going to start differently. I'm going to start with the bit that I normally finish with. I'm going to finish with the bit I'm going to change it. It forces you to be in the moment. It makes it more conversational, and the audience love it. Even if they
Yeah.
don't know that you've done it, they feel that you are doing this for the first time, and that's
Yeah.
what they want to feel. Somebody calls it in Australia, I've had it described as the 3-step rule. The 3-step rule is that at most conference centers, you're not speaking on the ground where the conference delegates are sitting. You're on a stage, some type of
Yeah. 3
platform.
steps up.
But
Yeah.
every time you walk up those steps, remember that you've been doing this for 15 years, but they've never heard you before. So don't just go into the theatrical, I'm reciting Othello's lines. Go into tell the story to these people. They're hearing it for the first time. Now, you can use your great stories. You can use your great one-liners. You can use your great interactive activities. You can ask them questions as much as you did, but remind yourself that they are hearing it for the first time. So try, like I'm talking
Yeah.
to you now, Dave, I've told these stories before. I've spoken about this before, but you're dictating the order and we're cutting in on each other, and that's how
Yeah.
every presentation should feel, which is
Yeah.
why I tell some presenters, why don't you try in your next presentation to not present on your own for 45 minutes, get somebody to interview you.
Mm. Yeah.
7 questions that lead on to your 7 stories or your 7 points, and do it as an interview. You're saying exactly the same thing, but you're going to be more in the moment. The dynamic is different. You're going to have to think differently about it. Have the confidence that you know your stories, you know your stats, you'll pop them in at the right time. Ditch the PowerPoint. No one's going to go, oh shit, I really want a PowerPoint presentation. Don't worry about that. Sit down at 2 comfy chairs, have a glass of water, make it more informal. We love informality, and no one is going to complain. It's more real, it's more authentic,
Yeah.
and it's like the first time because it is the first time.
Yeah, I actually take that a step farther. When I'm on podcasts, they'll oftentimes say, "What questions do you want me to ask? What do you want to cover? Um, what are your main points? What do you want to say?" And what I tell them is, I don't want to do any of those things. I said, I've given this speech, and if people want to watch it, it's online. What I'd love to do is I'd like you, from whatever you understand about what I'm doing and why you want me to be on here, to ask me questions that you think will be helpful to the people that we're talking to. And I don't know those people. You do. And not in an adversarial way, but like, hey, I'm here to be helpful. And I said, what I'm really hoping is that you actually ask me something that no one's asked me before. And it causes me to think about something that I've never thought about in that way before. And then to say something truly unique instead of saying, a good question. And now I'll cover the first part of my presentation as though this is a keynote, even though this isn't a keynote, but that's the best story I have for this. So I'm going to tell that first story from my keynote as my answer to your first question on this podcast. And by the end, people will have just gotten my keynote in 6 disjointed parts and with no visuals and without some of the connecting pieces. And it's actually a little bit worse. Instead of you saying, we're talking mostly with parents, and I know one of the biggest problem parents are having these days is X. How does what you're doing help parents? And I don't talk a lot about parenting. So now I've got an opportunity to, tell a different story, explain it in a different way. So I really like that. It made me think of what you said there about sitting in the back and listening. I didn't have a chance to do that because I was the last speaker, and my slot was in the morning of the last day, and it ended right after that. Like, they had donuts outside. It didn't even end at noon. It ended up like 10:30 in the morning, and there was like a donut bar, and have a good one and pack up and get out, right? So I was last, but there was nobody. I couldn't get in early enough the day before. I was
Yeah.
coming from somewhere else. But I'd spent a bunch of time with the conference brochure looking at the titles and looking at the descriptions, and I got out there and I said, this is perfect. So and so talked about this, and I'm going to talk about this as it relates to that. And that's a perfect lead in. I love, and I said something probably about being an MC and wanting that continuity. And later on, it looks like so-and-so talked about this, and that's another part of this. If this is true, then you're going to want to do this. And it only took 2 or 3 minutes, and then I set the brochure down. But it went really, really well because people are like, oh, he's talking to us right now, right here, and he's trying to, blend this together with other things that are going on, which just makes it more memorable too. When I don't, and that's what you want to do within your speech. Do the pieces of your speech make sense together, or are you distracting people with with what you're doing? And that's why you want everything to point to that one idea. So
Can I ask you
go
a
ahead.
question?
Yeah.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
What's your view? It's sort of a leading question. You can tell that I used to be a lawyer, but what's your view? I'm not talking about asking.
Objection, leading the witness.
Sustain.
Did I do it right?
Your view? I'm totally on board with your idea. I think we think exactly the same thing about the speaker, the presenter asking questions of the audience, getting them involved, pulling them in, as long as it's not, questions where they can just sort of say yes or no, but asking them specific questions. What's your view to flip that around about at the end of a presentation, how lots and lots and lots, I would say most, certainly here in Australia, most conference agendas have audience Q&A, whereby the presenter finishes, goes out to the audience, they build in 10 minutes, the presenter normally goes over time, you've normally got 3 minutes, and asks the audience, do you have any questions? I have thoughts on it, but I'm interested in how you play that. How do you do that?
I have strong feelings about it, and I'd be happy to hear yours. I don't like it. If they ask me, do you want Q&A? I say no. I don't like it for a bunch of reasons. Number one, oftentimes there's not questions. Somebody gets up there and says, so as I was listening to your speech, it made me think about blah, blah, blah political subject. And I just like to take 3 minutes. They don't say this part, but to just rant about something that I believe. And you're handing the microphone with no control to just someone in the audience who has no interest in asking a question and wants to be on stage, and they're not. Another one is people, when you're on stage in certain settings, if it's a workshop, you can create a kind of a back and forth dynamic where it's somewhat conversational. When you're on stage in front of 1,500 people and then you just go, any questions? It's really difficult for the lights to come down and for people to imagine standing up in front of 1,500 people and walking to a microphone or raising their hand. It's so abrupt. The one way that my co-author Stan Phelps handles it that I like is if you are going to do it, recognizing that sometimes there are no questions, is don't ever make the Q&A the end. So what he recommends is, let's say you've got 45 minutes. At 30 minutes, you say, now I want to stop at this point, and I would also preview it. I think the more you say, in a few minutes, we're going to be doing some Q&A, so if you have questions, I'd love to hear. You need to give some people time to kind of process. But then you stop at 30 minutes and you say, are there any questions? And maybe people ask a couple, but then it stops. And you say, and after the Q&A, I want to close with a story that I think really ties this all together. Because then one of the things we talk about in the book is primacy and recency are so important. The beginning and the end are so important. And if you give the end to the last question, you're really throwing away one of the most powerful parts of your presentation. And also, if you end on this really dynamic high point and then you say, any questions? It's a real just letdown. So those are my general thoughts, along with kind of a tip about how to present that. If they're like, you have to have Q&A, this is really crucial. So I'd love to hear your, thoughts. Obviously, I'm very opinionated.
My thoughts are what you just said. You got the answer correctly.
It's the only reason I have Andrew on. Andrew's a mouthpiece for Speak Different.
I was hoping you would say that. Otherwise, we would have had a very healthy argument. I think it never works. And I do say to my MC clients all the time.
You see it so much. Yeah.
And I never see it work. And I do see some speakers who do exactly what you said. They open it up, then they tell their final story, end on a high. My view is that if anyone's got any questions, they should absolutely ask a question. Come up and talk to me during the break. Why does everybody else have to hear what your question is?
That's another one of the downsides.
Yeah,
people ask
no
questions
need.
that, although helpful to them, won't be generally helpful
Yeah,
sometimes. And that's not them being bad. They said, do you have any questions? But somebody asks a hyper specific, unapplicable, sort of question that no one else can. And now everybody's held hostage,
yeah.
listening to the answer to a question they don't care
Yeah,
about.
they just want to get out to afternoon tea and have a coffee. So no, I definitely agree. It is very, very common now. I'm sure it's the same over there. It's very common that in a larger conference, in a big auditorium, they don't do anything with the microphone. It's all done through the conference app. People send questions through
Yeah.
Slido or various things, and that possibly the speaker can see it on the foldback monitor. Nobody can see it. That sometimes works. If you're a good speaker, you're able
You
just
can
to pick
pick
up and
them. You
run.
can,
You can
yeah,
have a quick look and say, actually, I can see
yeah,
somebody's just asked me a question that actually ties in. That can be okay.
yeah.
But no, I think it's a relic of the past, like PowerPoint. That's how things used to be done. That's how we still do them. I don't see any
Well,
real
it's
benefit.
it's it's also false audience engagement. Your presentation will probably not include anything that really connects with the audience or interacts with them in any way. And so let's just bolt on this random event at the end that hopefully allows people to feel like they were participating. And it's
I'll
like,
tell you one of
but
the
they're not.
issues that we have in conferences is, and I said it jokingly before, but it's true. We do put people in a dark room and then we put the speaker on a stage. We create unnecessarily we create a theater experience. And when you go to the theater or when you go to a concert or when you go to a comedian, the person on stage is the monkey. They're performing and you're the audience. And I often challenge a client, even in a big auditorium, to say, look, I understand that you want to have your beautiful screen, the LED screen looking fantastic. But for some presenters, it's actually better to put the lights on fully. If we're going to have a conversation, I don't want to have a conversation with you right now where I can't see you. Like,
Yeah.
when you're having a Zoom call with somebody and they turn their camera off, I find it like really uncomfortable. It's
Yeah.
almost like I'm doing this. It's like, I don't think that makes any sense. Lights on are great for if you're the right presenter and you really want to have a conversation, you want to ask them questions, you want to be able to see them, and you want them to feel equal to you, because they should feel equal to you if you're doing it properly. It shouldn't be that you're the lecturer and they're the students. You're having a conversation which you're guiding. Lights on in a room is a possibility if it's asked for, and quite an effective way of turning it into that dialogue rather than that one-way diatribe.
That reminds me of something we say in the book. I mean, one of the big things that we encourage: persuasive presenters tell powerful stories that reinforce a single idea. When we talk about reinforcement, we basically have four things that we recommend. We already said stories. So it's quotes, questions, stories, and statistics. And so one of the things I explain is that every time I started a college class, every training class that I've ever started or ever done, and even when I'm doing keynotes, I start with a question. Now, in keynotes, it has to be how many of you have ever been frustrated by it? It has to be some kind of raise your hand kind of question. But I always started my classes with a question, training classes with a question. I didn't talk about myself. I listened to them for a significant period of time. And then we started my portion. And what I taught them is, I'm listening to you. Now it's your turn to listen to me. And then also, we're just going to keep doing this. So that's the other problem. It starts with, like you said, lights off, lights up there. They're on stage. I like the way you said theater kind of experience. The norms, the social norms are you sit quietly, they do their thing. And so as a speaker, if you want to change that, you have to interrupt that pattern by starting an interaction way earlier than any questions, and that's something that can be used in any situation. People do it in meetings. They monologue for 50 minutes. They manage the agenda. They direct the whole thing, and then they stop cold with 20 seconds left and say, any questions? When they've demonstrated this is a one-way thing, and that's not about to change, right at the end. So speaking of the end, I think we're pretty close to the end. We've gone longer than we normally do, but I haven't regretted that. One of the things we talk about in the book is idioms, where people are basically using little mini analogies, but oftentimes they don't know what they mean. So they say we're even keel and don't rock the boat, and all these kinds of things, as though their audience is 18th century pirates or we're hitting home runs or we're striking out. So, and although as though their audiences are baseball players, or they reference, military stuff where, loose cannons and all this kind of stuff. And they don't even know it. They don't know what they're saying, and people don't know what they're saying. And if you ask them, where did that come from? Somebody on the one today said piggyback, which, we're not farmers anymore mostly. And not, I've probably very few people have ever seen a little pig on a pig's back. And I'm not even sure if it's 100% true that it happens. But people know it now from someone riding on someone else's piggyback, a child on their parents' back, and we call that piggyback. And then they said later that we need to cut the fat. And so what that reminded me of when I was thinking about that, because now I can't stop noticing it. I can't stop listening to people and having to go, oh, here they go again with just phrases that don't mean anything and don't make sense. But it reminded me of something that you did, because every culture has their own, right? And it reminds me of something that you did. I still remember it. We were at the cocktail reception after the event. I had spoken, I think, probably pretty close to last that day. And you came up behind me and you said, hey, Dave, I see a lot of these speeches. I see a lot of speakers. And I don't think most of them do a very good job. And I want you to know that I think you did a very good job. And then you said, and I'm not just pissing in your pocket. And I said, wow, I am so glad that you are not pissing in my pocket. And I also do believe that if in fact you were in my pocket pissing, that I would sense that. I would have a strong physical reaction to that happening and be very aware that that was. And what that is that's the Australian version of blowing smoke up your ass, which I since learned is from an English idea that you could resuscitate people who drowned in the Thames River by taking a big baffle and blowing smoke, actually by jamming it in their butthole and pumping them with smoke. Where they thought that was early CPR. It did not work, but they did it very actively and aggressively. And so, that's a funny example of how people do that. And I'm sure you're inundated with the corporate speak version of that. Are there any idioms that come to your mind that sort of have started to drive you crazy? Or is there anything, I guess maybe, and is there any way you've tried to counter that or sort of use that in any way in your speaking and in your communication? I think we just went from a G rating to somewhere up a little bit with some of that, but
I have 3 kids, and my oldest son has a note on the notes part of his app, which is called "Shit That Mum and Dad Say," and he takes note. He's an English teacher. Okay, he's an English teacher.
Oh yeah.
He writes down all of the things that when we're sitting around having a chat or at the dinner table, he doesn't live at home anymore, but for many years he did. And he would stop us as an English teacher, an English student, and go, what? What did you say? I'll give you an example. I don't know if you've ever heard of this one, but my wife has this phrase that I'm sure she got from her parents. Her parents are European. And that is that if somebody wakes up in the morning and looks really disheveled, the saying is, I looked like the wreck of the Hespers. Have you ever heard that phrase before? I don't know what that is, but there's some shipwreck of something that...
Right, there's a historical event from a time before even the person saying it that's been passed along for so long. And that's the problem with it. The idea of idioms is like analogies. I'm supposed to be able to tell you something you don't know by referencing something you do know and showing you that they're very similar and that your knowledge of the previous thing will help you with the next thing, right?
We do it without even realizing.
This is the opposite. It's like there's no way to even, you can even do deep level internet research in some of this stuff and they'll be like, we can't even find the original time that was used in, a newspaper or in any kind of document, and we can't track it back. And so literally nobody knows what it means, but sort of everybody knows what it means, but it's kind of unclear speech, right? It's unclear speech because you're using something that just doesn't, I even found out that some of the ones that people would use. So for example, a derogatory one that they would use which I think was designed to not be swearing. When I was growing up, people in my extended family would say cotton picking. And I never thought of it, but that was actually a racist term representing saying that you're the kind of person that would be picking cotton. And then you turn that into an adjective that's meant as a derogatory thing. Never would I have had any. Luckily, I didn't pick it up because it seems
Yeah.
so old
I've heard that
fashioned.
phrase.
But if I
I've heard
started
it.
throwing that around after moving south, where now I live in North Carolina, where there literally is a tobacco field or a cotton field outside of my house right now, people very quickly would have said, oh, that's a racist person there.
Yeah.
And I would have had no idea I was even doing it. So that's how far we kind of don't even know what some of these things mean. And now I'm cursed with hearing it constantly because I'm starting to pay attention to it, you know?
We have a lot of ours actually come from that we grew up watching, my generation, that we grew up watching 60s and 70s American TV shows.
Ah, yeah.
So I think you mentioned Knock It Out of the Park.
Yeah.
We don't play baseball here.
Yeah, people aren't playing baseball in Australia.
We're not knocking anything out of the park. We are playing cricket, and you're very rarely knocking a cricket ball out of the park.
Yeah.
Very rarely.
Yeah.
So we do it here. So there's a couple of things. First of all, it really does age you. And I do think as a speaker,
Sure.
as you become older, then like you and I are, similar vintage, we're talking to people who could be our children, right? So we're talking to Gen Zs and Gen Alphas and Gen Xs, like with Gen X. So we're talking to people who are much younger. And I'm well aware of that fact. So we don't want to age ourselves. I see speakers talking their musical reference.
Music, movies, TV shows, actors and actresses, all that kind of stuff.
Like they'll quote Elton John. It's like, why are we quoting Elton John? There'll be 7 people in your room that are, once upon a time, it may have been Duke Ellington. Like my kids don't know who Duke Ellington is. It's irrelevant.
Yeah.
So you do need to catch yourself and really think about that. That's why I think some of the best things that you can do as a speaker is to video yourself quite a lot.
Amen.
Watch it back. We are all our number one critics. We'll hear those idioms. We'll hear those little references. And to constantly reshape and redo your examples to be like, you don't want to be try hard. I don't want to look like I'm trying to be down with the kids, but I do want to use references that are at least ones that everybody, like I mentioned Beyonce before. Like
current events to anybody who's alive, the older folks are there when this recent thing is happening, and then the younger people will know it too. When you go back 20, 30, 40 years, you're dramatically decreasing the number of people who might potentially, know this thing.
The corporate stuff, though, is different, Dave. The corporate stuff, the corporate idiom, the corporate jargon, the corporate acronyms, I don't think this is just a presentation issue. I think this happens in meetings too. It is the most alienating thing to people.
Yeah.
Because it doesn't matter how successful or how senior we are. I'm sure you're in this position too. If I'm sitting around at a conference with 10 people and they inevitably are referring to the WTG factor or the people who work in LMI or the people who we used to deal with from the JTZ team, I will very rarely say, sorry, I don't know. What are you talking about? Like
you'd have to stop them constantly. You can't do it. Yeah.
No. And they don't realize they're doing it because it is their language. Like it really is the way they talk. All of that nonsense about silo mentalities and, pushing the bar and, that circle back, all that nonsense.
Boiling
we all know
ocean
what that means, but it's corporate bullshit.
Yeah.
In a presentation, if you're a chief financial officer and you're talking to your finance team, that's okay, right? Then it's like cyclists can use cycle terminology when they're talking to their cycling mates.
Yeah.
But it can push people out of your presentation real quick. So I do tell people, be, again, hyper aware of who is your audience, who's in the room, what are their pain points, what do they know, what do they not know, what do they want to know, what are the things that they talk about all the time. If you're a sponsor, do you know all of that stuff about your audience because you don't want to alienate them? You're one of them. You want to come across that corporate jargon thing, that's genuinely got out of hand. There are presenters in Australia whose presentation is satirizing that stuff.
I think I know them. Is it Wankernomics?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
so good. Yeah,
Yeah.
those guys are so good.
Have you seen them in the States?
I haven't, seen them live, but their stuff's all over the internet. I love it every time I see it. I think I've subscribed or I've done something. I see one every
Yeah.
day. It's so
Oh,
good.
they
Yeah.
presented at a superannuation conference that I did last year. And
That's
honestly,
401ks for our American listeners. Superannuation. That's another one I learned. Superannuation is retirement funds in Australia. Ours is the
there you go. See,
401ks.
and that's a really good example, Dave, because in my head, I actually edited the conference was SMSF, which you wouldn't know
You
because that
took one
is a
step.
jargon,
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
right? Self-managed super fund. And I was not
Yeah.
aware. If I was doing your superannuation, your
Yeah.
retirement fund conference,
Yeah.
obviously I would learn that. But
Yeah.
that's a perfect example of what we're talking
Yeah.
about. I absolutely made the assumption that that's a word.
Yeah.
That's an Aussie word. Anyway,
Yeah.
at a pension fund, retirement fund conference, these guys got up at the end of the conference and they'd done their homework. They'd done their homework beautifully. And all of the stuff that they were saying was all corporate jargon, corporate speak, corporate nonsense, the same sort of crap that we all have on our LinkedIn profiles and that we're influencers and international keynote speakers because we spoke in Auckland, New Zealand once. It's it is ripe for
Suburban
satire.
Sydney, Australia. Yeah. Well, that's like
Tasmania is
America. If you can get across the border 7 miles to Canada, all of a sudden you're an international speaker.
that's right.
It would have been
That's
farther
right.
away to speak in Alaska, but you went up through Detroit to Ontario, which is 9 miles, outside of, outside of Detroit.
Yeah.
Well, I'll give you credit, at least in Australia. I think superannuation actually sort of means something. 401k is a great example. The reason that's the retirement fund in America is because that's the code. Let's end where we began with law. That's the legislation that says that you can make tax deductible contributions to your retirement fund and not be taxed until you take them out in the future. And so they're like, beautiful. Let's take a number that makes no sense to anyone and doesn't have any actual intrinsic meaning, and let's spread it throughout the world. You'll like this. And it's perfect because you all live your life in kilometers. There's a little meme that goes around and says, I just started at work and everybody keeps asking me to sign up for the 401k. And I don't think I can run that far, but they're insistent. And I guess I'm going to try, you know, and that only works because we do 5Ks and 10Ks as races, even though we don't know what Ks are. And I know what Ks are because of travel, but also because I do a lot of races. So you end up kind of figuring out. But that's another example. You start talking in metric, and people are talking in this pounds and all that kind of stuff. So
I'm still in my head. I'm still 6'1" tall. I know that's
yeah,
183 centimeters, but when
yeah,
I grew up, it was 6'1". So I
yeah.
still
Well,
know
and
what
that's
that
what it
is.
is here. That's what it is here too. We're still the feet in inches.
Are
And
you
so that's
still
my first
6'9"?
joke.
Are you
What?
still 6'9" tall? I remember you
I'm
being
6'6",
6'9".
6'6",
Big.
6'9" in heels. Um, and so that's my first joke.
Yeah.
And so that's how much work I do. It's not a ton of work, but I did the research and I say I'm 2 meters tall and I'm 2.1 meters in heels, or like it's a little messier, but people appreciate it. And then I also referenced my wife's height, so I had to convert that to centimeters. So I said I'm 2 meters tall, but my wife is 160 centimeters or something, and in our relationship, deodorant is more than breath mints. At the end of my speech, I say, millions of people have traveled millions of miles and spent millions of dollars to see a tower that leans, referencing the Leaning Tower of Pisa. And you all have dollars. They're Australian dollars, so they're not worth anything. But actually, what's funny is sometimes they're worth like way more, right? And people are like, "We're going to America. We're gonna." I remember one time the market. I forget what it was. I think it might have been the 2008 2009 financial crisis. But there was some situation where everything flipped, and the guy's like, "I'm having a Mustang delivered, and we're going over there for 6 months." And people are like just buying out the Louis Vuitton store in Los Angeles. But anyway, I'll say, if I'm in a place with kilometers, I'll say millions of people have traveled millions of kilometers and spent millions of lira, millions of pounds, millions of francs, millions of euros, millions of whatever. And just that little thing again says, I know where I am. I know who you are. I care enough about you. Like you said, unlike a rehearsed presentation, I'm I'm aware of where I am, and I don't think this is just good for anyone or this just works all the time. I've put some effort into this. And that's one thing we said in the book. Sometimes just 3 or 4 little changes, sometimes just 2 minutes at the beginning, like you said, taking Andrew's intro, saying something about it, mentioning something about the conference or the people or why you're there or why you care. I remember recently I talked to a child support association meeting. So these are people who help make sure that people who owe child support pay the child support so that the families who need it, the children who need it, get the support they need after a divorce or something like that. And I said, my wife grew up in a family where her parents were divorced and her father never paid a dime of child support for 5 children, and they grew up their whole life incredibly poor because he refused to provide any of the legally required child support. That's just a little thing, but it's like I appreciate what you do, and I've seen the negative consequences of a lack of child support in my own life through one of my important relationships. It's just little things like that, I think, have a big impact and show
What's a
some
dime,
effort.
Dave?
What'd
What's
you
a
say?
dime? What's a dime? You said that they've never paid a
Oh,
dime
good
in
one.
their
See, you're catching me now. You're catching me now. 10 cents.
I
10
know. I'm
cents.
I'm just
Oh, you're messing with me.
just pulling your chain. Do you know that
Yeah.
one?
Oh, you're pulling oh boy. Now we're dealing with dog handling. Well, that's even another one, right? I don't have a dog in this fight. And it's like, are we like dog fighting, at least right now in America, is like one of the most controversial, not controversial even, just one of the most degenerate things you could do. A NFL football player was caught doing dog fighting and went to prison. And NFL players do a lot of bad things and never even serve any time and sometimes just keep playing in the NFL. And this guy got caught dog fighting and it was all over. And then people every day say, I don't have a dog in this fight. And it's like, what dog fights are you attending? Like, it's just such a wild, but again, it is until you start paying attention, you don't see it and it's just sort of invisible. And that's part of what we're trying to do. Like you said, record yourself on audio, record yourself on video. And some of this is just pay attention and put some effort into it. And there's a lot of things you can do to sort of improve it. All right.
Absolutely.
We've gone incredibly early for you, incredibly late for me. I'm gonna let you wrap it up. Anything you wanted to tell folks, anything you love to emphasize when you talk about presentation skills or speaking effectively, anything that's left after all the things that we've talked about?
I think we've covered everything, but if I was going to hone in on the two things that we've said that I feel the strongest about,
Ooh, summary. I like it.
simplicity,
Simplicity.
simplicity,
Yep.
keep it as simple as possible. We know that you're a genius. We know that you're the expert, but the audience are not the expert. They're not going to remember most things that you said. So just 1, 2, maybe 3 very, very simple key messages. That doesn't mean that you're treating them as an idiot. Doesn't mean you're dumbing it down, but just 2 or 3 key messages. And authenticity, I know it's a cliche, but I still would say if you're the sort of person who has some that you over gesture because you're so enthusiastic, or if you like sitting down on a chair, do whatever makes you feel comfortable and be
Yeah.
authentic. That doesn't mean if you're the sort of person who swears a lot, curses, I think you call it, got to be a little bit careful with that. You have to rein in certain parts of your personality depending on where you are. But informality, definitely in Australia, probably a little bit less in the States. Informality goes a long way. That doesn't mean not being professional. It just
Yeah.
means not being overly professional and overly corporate and overly perfect. That
That's one that
authenticity.
I've gotten some laughs out of in Australia is there's definitely more cursing, swearing, like in the newspaper, in the news, sort of in the culture than there would be in
Yeah,
America.
yeah,
And just like, I think I was there and on the cover of the newspaper was like some politician like in a Speedo and his budgie smugglers just, coming out of the water or something. It's like,
yeah.
wow, that is not, and there'll be quotes of people just saying the wildest things. And I'm like, you just don't get to do that in America. I'll reinforce what you summarized. Simplicity, I think, is huge. That's actually made to stick. We referenced that. They have a framework that's the acronym is success, and S is for simple, right? Simplicity sort of wins, but you said
It's hard.
authenticity.
It is
Yeah.
hard to
Well, if you're
take
so
your
smart, that's what
complex
I tell
stuff.
people. I'm so smart and I have so much to share. And okay, if you're so smart, then be smart enough to figure out how to simplify it for people, right? Like that takes intelligence. But then you said authenticity, and I know you said that before, and that reminds me of one of the best compliments I got in Australia. I was doing a series of presentations over like 3 weeks to school, to youth workers who focused on kids who were struggling in school. And I was talking about my freak factor concept about how weaknesses were strengths and encouraging them to see potential in sometimes the people who seem to have the least potential. Um, and it was set up as a workshop that sometimes started before lunch, and then we had some lunch, and then we finished after lunch. There's a lot of ways to do it. So I was on stage for about an hour or two, and then we had lunch, and I just sat down at a table with some of the people there, and we were talking, and somebody stopped real abruptly, and I thought I'd done something wrong. And she said, "This is really weird." She goes, "You seem like you're the same person at this table right here that you are when you're on stage." And I know she meant it as a compliment, but I was like, I'm not smart enough or whatever to like have like this is me, and I'm not an actor. I'm not a paid performer. This is me. This is all I've got. And
It
yeah,
is a
I'm
compliment,
I'm the
though.
same up there, and I think that is something to sort of
It is.
strive for. Even swearing. Gary Vaynerchuk, Gary V is very famous. I don't know if he's made it all over the world, but he's very
Yeah,
famous
yeah,
in America. And every
yeah.
other word is the F word. If you're successful enough, you can say what you want, and it also affords you some authenticity. I think the reason a lot of people aren't authentic is they're like, "What if I get in trouble?" When the real me isn't what people want, right? But there is a level at which, if you have enough success, you get to keep being yourself in a way because nobody can really shut you off. Nobody can end
And
your
a and
your
an
career.
incorrect perception, there is an incorrect belief, an incorrect perception that when I walk on stage, my personality needs to be left off stage because I'm here
Mm,
now as a sales manager, and that person is a professional who talks about
yeah,
corporate stuff and professional stuff and office stuff. No one wants to hear about my family, my dog, my struggles. Yeah, they
yeah,
do
yeah. They
if that's
do.
relevant and if that story sells your
Yeah,
message. They
yeah,
love seeing their, corporate people. They love seeing that side of them. Those speakers are the ones that get the biggest best
yeah,
evaluations, really good content, and I really got to know you, and I felt that you were talking to us
yeah,
like we were friends. Like,
yeah,
turns out we're all just bumbling our way through life, even if we're the CEO or the CFO or the CMO. We don't know we're just bumbling our way through, and we go home to our kids and they make fun of us. Doesn't matter how important we are.
yeah. Well, I could keep doing this all night. Thank you so much for starting your day with me, Andrew. Hopefully, I'll get you over here or I'll get back there and we'll be able to go around Bondi again together. Thanks for taking the time, and maybe we'll have you on again. We didn't really end up getting to humor, so maybe we'll schedule in a couple months. We'll
Let's
schedule to
do
have you
that.
back on
Let's do
talking
that
about
another
humor.
time. I definitely don't want to piss in your pocket, and I don't want to butter you up. I don't want to butter you up. I don't know if that's a phrase that we got from you or you got from us, but I love this. I loved having this
Yeah,
conversation, and I love not knowing what we were going to talk about. Like I
yeah,
couldn't be more comfortable and couldn't enjoy it more. So I'll come back and talk about humor. We didn't talk
yeah,
about that at all.
yeah, yeah. We had a
Another
little
time.
humor. All right, this has been another episode of the Imperfectionist Podcast. This is our special series on the book Speak Different. We had Andrew Klein, MC extraordinaire from Australia. I know you loved his accent, and maybe that's enough to keep you listening. In the future, we'll see you next time.